Welcome to Compelling Tips and Techniques for Passing the New AutoCAD 2013 Certification Exams. And this is part 2 of a 2-part series. And again, I want to thank you for spending your valuable time with us today. My name is J.C. Malitsky, and I'm owner of Digital JC CAD. I want to thank all of you who attended part 1. And for those of you who did not, I'm a former community college professor, a former department chair. I've been an ATC instructor for 26 years, and I've been using and teaching AutoCAD since 1985. I'm co-author on several AutoCAD textbooks, and I'm an Autodesk certified instructor. Recently, I've been working with Autodesk on their Autodesk Certified Evaluator program, which assists instructors on developing their teaching and presentation skills. And this exam prep class is based on the many years that I've been taking the exams and passing them. There's just been way too many to remember. Your goal is to pass the AutoCAD 2013 certification exams. And at the end of this class, you will be able to differentiate between high-level and low-level study and preparation techniques based on the exam objectives, to develop exam workflow techniques based on the exam objectives, to identify skill-based and knowledge-based exam objectives and how to study for each, and to develop a level of comfort for passing the AutoCAD certification exams. But again, this class is about understanding what to study and what not to study. And these are the AutoCAD commands and features that we are going to cover in this session. Let's look at knowledge versus skill performance, the hands-on based objectives that the exams are based on. First, the key to the objectives are the action verbs. And so for that skill performance, hands-on portion of the exam, you create or modify or edit something. Or you could trim or extend. In other words, use one of the AutoCAD commands. But usually when you get an objective like that, it means that you are going to do something, i.e. the hands-on portion. But then there's the knowledge-based, and that's objectives that start with describe or identify or explain. And these are usually something like you're going to take a quiz that you have to answer, like true, false, multiple choice, matching. But I do want to call your attention to that sometimes the objectives are intertwined. So you've got to prepare in different ways looking at the action verbs of what you're going to be doing. The key points are to study only the commands and features that the exam objectives address and develop a workflow for study and preparation. The data sets used in this presentation are not used in any of the AutoCAD certification exams, and no AutoCAD certification exam questions will be used or discussed. And this class is designed to work through as many exam objectives as time permits, highlighting time-saving tips and techniques for methods of study and preparation. There are no guarantees that taking this class you will pass any of the AutoCAD certification exams, but I hope you do. So let's get started. Let's take a look at 2 more AutoCAD 2013 objectives. The first being describe and use arrays. And we will look at rectangular, polar, and path arrays. And we're also going to go in and create, insert, and edit blocks. So let's take a look. Let's go in and let's create a new CAD training lab using arrays and blocks and editing and modifying. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and create a rectangular array of my CAD training lab. So here's the desk and chairs. And what I need to do is to create 18 seats. Well, you can see that my columns and rows are way off. So I know I can fit in 3 columns, and the spacing between those columns is 80 units. The number of rows, let me put 4 rows in, and 4 rows gives me way too many desks and chairs that I need. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that down to 3 rows. And then my spacing, I can open up the spacing. This is going to be nice. I'm going to open the spacing to about 70 units in this case. No, you know what? I can even go farther. I'm going to go 75 units. So I opened up that space a little bit larger. What I like about this is in the Array Creation ribbon, you have the options to continually modify what you're working on while you're in the array. Now let me call your attention to the bottom of the screen. I'm going to zoom that up for you again. And notice you have associative, spacing, columns, rows, etc. down in the command line. Again, as we've shown before, you can go in and select the different options you need on the command line. So your choices are use the creation ribbon at top or the command line subcommands on the bottom. It's your choice. Once we've created the rectangular array, let's go in and insert some blocks and modify some things. So I'm going to go in first to Insert, and I'm going to insert that computer table, and I can specify where I want it positioned on the screen. So I'm going to go 900 units in the X, 400 units in the Y. My scale I'm going to leave at 1, and my rotation angle I'm going to set to 220. Now how do I know to do this? Well, I've done this presentation before. So I'm going to click OK and position the instructor table where I need it. Also, as I see the chairs, you know what? I just don't like the design of the chairs. So I'm going to double click on the chair to go into the block editor or the Bedit command to do that. I do want to call your attention to the authoring palette. The authoring palette's used a lot for dynamic blocks, but it can also be used for the blocks that we're creating here. In this case, I'm not going to use the authoring palette, but I did want to call your attention to study that and to look over the tools that are on that palette. What I need to do is to come in here and to make an array. So I'm going to select those objects, and I'm going to come in and do a polar array. And I'm going to go and do a polar array, and I'm going to select the center of that circle. And of course, that's the main part that holds the chair together and onto the legs. But notice how easy it was where my center object snap came on, because remember, I set running object snaps. So I'm going to go ahead and select the center of that, and notice the different polar array I can get by selecting that grip that's on there, arrow grip. And as I modify that grip, I can make the changes. Well, I'm not going to make any changes there. What I can come in here is, again, in my Array Creation ribbon, I can come in and change it to 5 units if I would like. I can also come in and go to the bottom of the screen. And remember what we talked about before. You've got all the different options, and rectangular arrays give you some options, polar arrays give you other options. So again, whether you use the ribbon at the top or on the bottom, it really doesn't make any difference. It's just how you use it and how quickly you use it to navigate through the exam. So that looks good. I'm not going to do any associative on this one. I don't need to do that. I'm going to go in and erase the different circles that are on there because I don't need those 2 other circles. So I'm going to go in and erase these 2 circles. They're not needed for this new block design. I like that. I'm going to close the block editor. I'm going to save the changes back. And there's our new block and our new design. So in this case, what we're able to do is to insert a block at a specific location, or I could drag the block to any location I wanted. And also I was able to come in and modify an existing block and changing its array pattern. So let's move on. Let's take a look at our third option, and our third array option is array by a path. And I'm going to go in and select the block, the tree that you see on the screen, and I'm going to select the path curve. And I notice that it's not associative, so I'm going to make this an associative array, so it's one array. And I can go and align items. So if I click on align items, you can see how the items will twist and turn and align themselves. I also know that we are now in measure. So we're at a measure method, and the measure is measuring 14 items based on 108 units. I'm going to change that to 100 units. And so I'm measuring that along 100 units. And you can see how it changes. I could change that to 125. So now as I change it to 125, if you notice, the number of items has changed to 12. So measure measures the equally space between the items along that path. The other method that I could use was divide. And I could divide those 12 objects equally along that path. Well, maybe I need to set that to 10. So now I can set that to 10. So look in the array creation ribbon for associative arrays, aligning items, divide and measure. But maybe I want to create different rows. Maybe I want 3 rows, and I want those rows spaced every 100 units. So now I could create more rows of trees along that path. What I can also do is I can select that array, right-click, go into Array, and replace an item. So it says Select Replacement Items. I'm going to select this tree here. And where do I want to place them? I want it on the centroid of that part. And so you have the ability to replace some of the items along that path. The key again is when I selected it, I did a right-click, looked at Array, and then looked at some of the other options to modify the array. Let's take a look at the next AutoCAD 2013 objective, which is to use grips. And grips have been around for a long time. It's probably one of my favorite features in AutoCAD. And from the AutoCAD Help menu, it says we use grips to reshape, move, rotate, and manipulate objects. But we need to look at the what I call the two different types of grips. There's the old school grip modes that have been around for a long time, where we can stretch and move and rotate, scale and mirror. And to cycle through the different grip modes, we would hit the space bar or the enter key to get into the grip mode that we wanted. And then there's new multi-function grips. And the multi-function grips are on many different objects, from polylines and splines and texts and lines and arcs and dimensions, as well as others. And we're going to take a look at all of those because that's what we need to study. So let's take a look at grips. Let's take a look at how grips are applied to different AutoCAD objects. So let's zoom in here and let's take a look at a simple line. When I select the grips, I see that the line has 3 grips. But what type of grips are they? That's the key. If I hover over the end grip, I see that I have a multi-function grip on that end. So that means I must have a multi-function grip on the other end. So if I'm studying and trying to figure out and to learn about grips, I'm going to know that the line has multi-function grips of stretch and lengthen. But if I select the middle one or hover over the middle one, I don't get anything. So if I select it, I go into grip modes. From multi-function grips to grip modes. The grip modes are old school, the ones that have been around forever. So as I hit the space bar, I call your attention to the lower left of the screen as I cycle through the different grip modes. So if I go back to stretch, what can stretch do? What can move do? What can rotate do? So I'm going to go ahead and zoom that up for you. And notice that I have base pointer, copy, or reference, or undo, of course. So I have the ability to use some of these subcommands or command features. I'm going to go ahead and rotate copy, and as I go ahead in, I can rotate and copy that. I'm going to select that, spacebar, rotate, copy, pick, and keep picking and rotating and copying those objects as I go along. Hit the escape key to get out of that. So if I go to a circle, on a circle, as I hover over the grips, I notice I don't have any multi-function grips on a circle. I'll select the center grip. For my grip modes, I'll go into stretch or move or rotate. Well, you're not going to rotate a circle, right? Or scale or mirror or stretch. And again, by hitting the spacebar enter key, I can go in, and I'm in scale here. I can go in and scale and copy and determine a different base point to scale off of. So what to study? Study grip modes, study what the grip modes can do, and practice those on different objects. We should look at the help menu. I think we're going to look at the help menu in a little bit to see more about grip modes and grips. So let's take a look at some other objects. What about an arc? If I select an arc and go to the center of the arc, notice nothing. But if I go and hover over the end point of an arc, we have the same thing like a line, stretch and lengthen. Let's go to this object. I don't know what this object is. It's a spline. So I select the spline, and as I select the spline, wow, these are great multifunction grips. Stretch, fit, point. So I can select that grip and then stretch it and move it after I select it. So I have the ability to do that. I can also hover it and add a fit point. I can add a fit point right there. So I've added a new fit point. Now, if I don't really want it, I can remove a fit point, a fit data point. Let's see what's on this grip. Same thing. Move, add points, stretch, fit points. What's this arrow? What do I have the arrow ability to do? Fit and control vertices. Fit it through the control point or change it through the different vertices that are there. The control points versus the fit data points. So in this case, in a spline, we have many different multifunction grips that affect the way this object can be manipulated. I'm going to go ahead and zoom over to this object. This object is a polyline. So I'm going to go ahead and select the polyline. And as I select this polyline, I notice the different grips that are on there. If I select this grip, it says stretch vertex, add vertex, remove vertex. Very similar to what a spline is. Let's select this grip. Well, wait, this is different. This one says convert to line or add a vertex. Well, I'm going to convert that to a line. Let's see what happens. It changes that arc back to a line. So with multifunction grips on this polyline, I can make some changes. Hover over it, convert it back to an arc. How big do I want the arc? So I can change the shape and size of the arc with multifunction grips. Let's do one more. I'm going to select this dimension, and I've used dimensions, grips and dimensions for many, many years. So if I hover over that dimension that's on the text, notice all the different options for editing. You know, this is a multifunction grip, but sort of an editing grip, where I can go ahead and stretch that if I wanted to stretch that and move that or modify that object. Let's go back in there. Let's see what this grip does on the end. Continue dimension, base dimension, flip arrow. Flip the arrow on the outside. Flip arrow, flip the arrow back inside. Continue base, flip arrow, stretch. So we have the ability to look at different multifunction grips based on the different hover locations of each grip. Above dimension line. So I can put it above the dimension line. Hover over it. Center vertically. So I can center vertically and bring it back. And press escape to get out of grips. As you can see, we just did a line, a polyline, a spline, a circle, and a dimension. But there are many other objects that we can use grip modes or multifunction grips on, and that's what you need to study. Let's take a look at AutoCAD help about using grips. And one of the things I want to call your attention to that's really important is use F1 or help when you need help. But in this case, I'm studying for the exam. And the scenario we're looking at is how do I use help in grips? Well, grips is kind of complicated. Now I know that there's two different types of grips. There's the old school grip modes and there's the new multifunction grips that are on many objects. And again, I wish we had more time to go over things like hatch and what are the multifunction grips for hatch. That's another great one that we didn't have time for. But let's take a look at the help menu. And when you go into help, I'm in help about editing with grips. And there's a small little video. Definitely spend some time looking at the video. You'll pick up some nice tips and techniques from the video. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. In objects with multifunction grips. So under 2D objects, what does help tell us? You can use multifunction grips for lines and polylines and arcs and ellipses and splines and hatch objects. So the example that they're showing here is the hatch objects. And then you can look at dimensions and text and also look at other 3D objects. So again, study over the different types of grip locations, what you can do with those grip locations, whether they be grip modes, for stretch and rotate and mirror, etc., or multifunction grips, because the multifunction grips, again, are different for every single object. And then as I scroll down, there's some important notes. So I'm going to look at the important notes and what does that mean, and maybe I'm going to look at some tips for stretching with grips, or maybe limit the display of grips for improved performance. So I'm going to look at everything that this help screen gives me so I can start to prepare to use grips and understand what grips do on different objects inside of AutoCAD. Let's take a look at a group of commands that we call the inquiry commands. But first I want to call your attention to that small little part that's on the screen. As you can see, we have no dimensions, so we do not know the size of the circles or the perimeter of the polyline or the radius of the arc or the angle. So we can use commands to inquire about the drawing. And our first command is the measure geom command, which is under utilities, and we go to measure, and we can measure the distance or the radius of an arc or the area of the object or that angle. But we can also use ID and list to inquire about the part. We can also use object properties or the properties palette by turning that on, by selecting objects and getting the object's properties. But in many cases, for example, if I'm going to use distance, I'm just going to type in DI, because for me, it's faster to type in the command DI and then select, for example, the center of the large circle to the center of the small circle to figure out what's that distance between the circle centers. So in many cases, I type in the commands because it's faster for me. So let's take a look at the inquiry commands. The part you're looking at is a part that I use in my college credit classes and also my ATC classes. And it's really to inquire about the part, which we call the inquiry commands. There's no dimensions on the part, so I have no idea what the diameters are or the radius or any of the angles. So I can use the measure geom command and the options to determine the distance or the radius, the angle, the area, maybe the volume. I can also use commands like ID and list. So let's take a look at a few of those. First of all, I'm just going to type in DI for distance. I find that to be the easiest for me instead of going through the menus. So what's the distance from the center of the large circle to the distance of the small circle? And that distance is 4.741. You know what? There's just way too many units here, so I'm going to go into units real quick. I'm going to type in my units. And we do have decimal, and we can look at architecture or engineering or fractional or scientific, but I'm going to change the decimals down to 1 point past the decimal so it's easier for us today. So let's do that again. I'm going to go into DI for distance. The distance from the center of that circle to the center of that circle is 4.7, and we have that. Let's take a look at some other options. What's the DI or distance that I'm typing in? The distance from the midpoint of that slot to the center of the circle. Well, that distance is 2.5. What about the DI distance from the corner? Oh, the corner, this is a block. So remember when we set our tools, I told you to set the insert running object snap. So this must be a block. So I'm going to grab the insertion point of that block to the center of that. There's my running object snaps, and that distance is 2.2. So again, we can use distance to inquire about the distances from centers to centers. But what about the inclination angle? What's the inclination angle of the large circle to the small circle? Well, again, I can use distance to figure that out. So if I go from center to center using my running object snaps, the inclination angle is 9 degrees. So it's up 9 degrees off the horizontal. So again, more information. How about the delta x to the delta y? So from to, I can extract that data if that is important to me. The other thing that I can do is I can come in to measure and I can figure out the radius. So what's the radius of that part? And the radius is 0.8. What about the angle in the front? This angle, what is this angle? So again, I could use these commands to find the angle of 76 degrees. So what should you try and practice? Practice using all of the measure geom options that you see here, as well as ID and list, and figure out what each one of these options gives you when you inquire about a line, circle, arc, block, text, what have you, in an AutoCAD drawing. If we look at this drawing, the civil drawing is very dense. We can use isolate and hide objects to simplify viewing of the drawing, so it's easier for our design or drafting workflow. And we're not going to use any of the layer controls such as on-off, freeze-thaw, lock, unlock, or even transparency. We're going to use isolate and hide object tools. So let's take a look. In this drawing, I have a very dense civil drawing. And what I need to do is to find an area to work in by using isolate and hide. Really, it's to simplify the area to work in. And I'm not going to use layer controls to define that area. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in to a couple properties that I need to work on in this area. So without using layer controls, if I right-click, the pop-up menu comes up and go into isolate or hide objects. I'm going to go into isolate objects. I can come into this area and then define by a window, or I can define by a crossing the area to which I want to work. And there it is. Now you notice that the rest of the drawing has faded away. What I also can do, and I realize I have just too much stuff here on my drawing, so if I again right-click, come up to isolate, and now I'm going to go to hide objects, not isolate, hide objects, and I'm going to hide the objects that I do not need to work on. So it'll save me some time in there. So there I go. And there I've removed the objects I don't need to work with. So now I can come in, make any changes or modifications to any part of the drawing that I want, and that will simplify and make it easier for me to visualize what I'm looking at, right? And then when I'm done, the only thing I can do is do a right-click, isolate, and end objects isolation. And the objects will come back. So the key for you to look at is to look at how can I create a drawing and simplify it and use isolate and hide, and when is it applicable to use one versus the other. That's what you need to study. Let's look at the next AutoCAD 2013 objective, which is to set the annotative property for objects. And not all AutoCAD objects can be annotative. We're going to look at annotation objects and styles. We're going to look at annotative property assigned to objects or set in styles. And we're going to look at annotation scaling. So 3 different things. The first thing is annotation objects and styles that can be annotative in AutoCAD. So annotation objects can be annotative. And which are they? They're blocks and attributes, dimensions and dimension styles, geometric tolerances, hatch patterns, multi-leaders and multi-leader styles, text, multi-line text, and text styles. So let's step back for a second. If we have a drawing that's 10 years old, or even a drawing today, text styles or dimension styles or multi-leader styles may not be set to be annotative. So how would we take an object in AutoCAD that's not annotative and make it annotative? Well, let's use the example of a simple piece of text. If we select the text, we can go into the Properties palette and change the annotative property to yes, and now that piece of text becomes annotative. And in a few seconds, I'm going to talk to you about why is that important, and you'll see why. So, to make an annotation style annotative, not an object, now we're going back to the annotation styles. We can go into a dimension style and set it to be annotative, multi-leader style to be annotative, or text style to be annotative. So you can have styles annotative or objects annotative. So let's look at this simple example. Here we have 3 different annotation objects in AutoCAD. Text objects, dimension objects, and multi-leader objects. And you can see they're at different scales based on the way we've set our annotation scale or our viewport scale in AutoCAD. And I'm going to show you that in just a few seconds. So really what we're doing is we're doing annotation scaling, scaling the drawing up or down. That resizes the scale of the objects using this annotative property. So let's use an example of annotation scale, and we'll use that text example again. And this comes right from the AutoCAD Help menu. The annotation scale is used to determine text height, or the overall scale of an annotation object, which text is. If the annotative property of an annotative object is enabled, in this case text, the text height or scale of the annotation object adjusts based on the current drawing annotation or viewport scale to remain at the same output size. Now what does that all mean? Basically that means is you're in model space or in your layout, and as you scale the drawing up and down using annotation scale or viewport scale tools, your text and dimensions and multi-leaders, etc. will get larger or smaller based on that scale. And that's the key. So scaling annotations is done in the status bar. And the drawing status bar displays the tools that you need for scaling these annotations. And you can switch between model space and paper space, but it makes different annotation tools available. So you use annotation scale to scale a drawing in model space. You use viewport scale if you're in that paper space layout and you want to scale the drawing in that viewport, in that layout, up or down. You must turn on some tools, and the first tool to turn on is the Annotation Visibility tool, and the other tool is the Automatically Add Scales to Annotative Objects tool. And those are the two little icons with the light bulb and the thunderbolt. Make sure you click those on first, and that's a key. Let's take a look at applying the annotative property to annotation objects. And in this simple drawing, we're just looking at text and dimensions. But the first thing that I would like to do is I'm going to go into the text style and take a look at text style. And I noticed I'm in my annotative text style. That's the standard that comes with AutoCAD, as the standard style does. And I noticed that my annotative property is set. So if I apply text to the drawing, I know I have annotative text. I'm going to go to my dimension style, and again, standard and annotative are the default styles that come with AutoCAD. So I'm going to go in and modify and check to see that the annotative property is set. And it is. So now I have my annotative property set for both text and dimensions. And if I create text or dimensions, I know they will be annotative, right? So the next thing I want to check is, do I have my tools on? Do I have my Annotation Visibility, which shows annotative objects for all scales? That is turned on, so the light bulb's turned on. And do I want to select the Thunderbolt to click that on so the Thunderbolt turns on to automatically add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes? So you want to make sure that those two are set on, especially when you first start, or if you are a beginner or you're using it for the first time, so you get an understanding of how that works. Let me change the annotation scale in model space to 1 to 2, and let's see what happens. Oh, the text and the dimensions on the bottom got larger, but not on the top. That's interesting. Let's try it to 1 to 4 and see what happens. Yes, they got larger. Well, if I hover over text 2, on my cursor I noticed the little triangles that are showing that I am in an annotative property has been assigned to this text. If I do the same thing to the text on the top, I do not get the two little triangles or the one little triangle that's applied. So the top text is not annotative. If I select the top text, I wonder how high that text is because it's not changing. The height of the text is 1 unit. Let's see how high the text in model space is of this object. Well, if I go in here, the height in model space is 4 units. Paper space height is 1. That would be correct because I'm at a 4 to 1 scale. If the original text was put in at 1 unit, I've moved it to 1 to 4. The text has now gotten larger by 4. Okay? And if we look at the dimensions, all the dimensions have been scaled up 4 times also. So let me go back and set that to 1 to 1. And I'm going to select that piece of text that we have right here. I'm going to go in and change my annotative property from no to yes so that one piece of text in my drawing now becomes annotative. Let's recheck it with the annotation scale to go 1 to 2. Yes, just what I would expect. 1 to 4, just what I would expect. 1 to 1, and there we go. So by using my annotation scale in model space, I'm able to scale up or scale down accordingly. Let's check in the layout. If I go into the layout, I'm going to set my scale at 1:1, and that's again what I would expect, except this is my viewport scale. Because I'm in my layout, I'm in paper space, I clicked in the model space, and so as I change my scales accordingly, you can see the text and dimensions are all getting larger, and that's what I'm looking to do. So, what do you need to study? You need to study about how do you apply annotative properties inside the text style, the dimension style, and multi-leader style. So you understand the workflow of how to do that. You also need to take a look at making sure that your tools at the bottom of the screen are turned on, and how to use the annotation scale or viewport scale tools to bring these up and down. So go ahead and give that a try. Our final objectives are to create and use layouts, create and use viewports, and use page setup for plotting. So we're going to look at these three to close out our session today. Let's address the first objective, which is to create and use layouts. The drawing that I'm using is from the AutoCAD 2013 sample folder, and the drawing has an elevations layout created for us with the title block and border inserted. If I need to create a new layout, I select that layout, right-click, and come up to New Layout, or from Template to create that new layout. I can go in and delete a layout, rename a layout, move or copy a layout. So we have different creation and manipulation options for us. All right, so I created that new layout. If I select the layout becomes active, and I can right-click and then rename it. So I could rename it ARCH for architectural, and that's my architectural layout that I'm creating. I can right-click and then go into our other objective, which was use page setup for plotting, and use the page setup manager to set that. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and delete this layout. Yes, I want to delete it out, and I'm going to use the layout that came with this drawing. So what do I need to do first? I've got the layout created how I want it. I've inserted the title block and border on it. So what would we do next? We would go into the page setup, and we need to set the page. So I'm going to go into the page setup manager, which is not plotting. People get this confused sometimes and think this is plotting. Nope, this is just setting the page up. The page setup manager already has a page setup layout name. It has a printer plotter set of all the different printer plotters that we could use. And the paper size has been set. So we can go in to set different paper sizes. We can also go in to set what plot area. Now, since I'm in this layout, I have four options: display, extents, layout, and window. If you're plotting from model space, you may get other options as well. So you need to check that out when you study. We can, of course, set plot scale, set our plot style table to monochrome, look at our plot options, and our drawing orientation. So to address that third objective, which is page setup, we need to look at the page setup manager, and you need to go through all of these options to understand what you can set and how you set them. Okay, so that's set. I sort of like that. Now what I need to do is I need to go into the layout tab to create some viewports. And one of the objectives was to create and use viewports. So I should be on the viewport layer, and the three different types of viewports that I can create are rectangular, polygonal, and object. So the first one that I'm going to create is a rectangular viewport. I double click inside the viewport, and I come and put the drawing or the elevation, in this case, where I want it. Next thing I do is, after I set that, I come in and I come down to and I'm in the layout. I come down to viewport scale. And when I go into viewport scale, I select the viewport scale. There it is. So I've got that set. If I'm not going to manipulate that anymore, what I can do is lock the viewport. And one way to lock it is just to go down in the status area, select the little yellow lock, and turn it to a blue closed lock. I can also go in and select the viewport. So I have the ability to select the viewport, right click, and I could do the same thing, display locked yes or display locked no. If this was a 3D model, I could go into shade plot and set any of the shade plot settings, as well as other settings that you can see on the pop-up menu. So you need to look over the different options. The next viewport that I'm going to create is a polygonal viewport. So I can pick, let me zoom this up a little bit. I could pick here, select close at the bottom of the screen, and now I can close that polygonal off. So you can create some unique shapes. Let me undo that one, and let me create another polygonal one. And this polygonal viewport I'm going to create is I'm going to put an arc in it. So I can put some arcs in it. I can go back and select line, put some lines in it, go down to select close, and now I could close that off. Double click inside here, come up and set my scale. So if I want to set my scale here at, there we go. You know what, maybe I want to manipulate this. Can I manipulate the viewports? Of course, I can select any of the multi-function grips to pull those grips to different locations, and that's what I'm going to do. So again, multi-function grips can manipulate the viewport. And the last viewport that I can create is from an object. I'm going to select the Home tab, and I could create rectangles or polygons, but no, I don't need to use those objects because that's how I can create layouts. But I'm going to create one by a circle. So I'm just going to create a big circle right here. So if I have that circle, I can create that as a viewport. So if I come into the Layout tab, come in and select Object, and I select that circle object becomes a viewport. So any object, like I'm showing here, especially closed and bounded, like a polyline, a rectangle, a polygon, a circle, are great objects to use by using the object method to create a viewport. So that's kind of nice. Again, a different technique. So to review, understand how to create the 3 different basic type of viewports, from rectangular to polygonal to object. I can also go in and clip a viewport. So if I go into clip a viewport, it says select object to clip. And then it says, do you have a polygonal object created or do you want to create one? So if I go into create one, and I'm just going to clip this like this, come over here, close that off, you can see I clipped that existing viewport into the new viewport that I created. And I know many of you clip viewports in different ways. So that's just an example. You add the 4th one to it, is clipping an existing viewport. So what should you study? How to use, create layouts, how to use the Page Setup Manager with that layout, and how to create and use viewports. Let's take a look at the system variable VP rotate assoc. If I type in VP rotate assoc, the system variable that is currently set on my computer is set to 0. Watch what happens when I rotate this viewport. So I'm going to select the grip, I'm going to cycle through my grip modes, and as I slowly rotate this a little bit off center, watch what's going to happen. The viewport rotates, but the object does not. And that's a setting of 0. Let me undo that and let's do it the other way, which is VP rotate assoc, set it to 1, go in, select the grip, cycle through your grip modes to rotation, slowly rotate it over, and watch what's going to happen. The object and the viewport rotate together. So you need to look at how VP rotate assoc works, because that has to do with the using of viewports. In closing, let's take a look at the Autodesk certification information and additional resources. Your start point is at autodesk.com/certification, where you can get information on all the Autodesk certification exams. Also, I would like you to check out the Autodesk certification official prep materials, and they are provided by Wiley Cybex and by Ascent. And these official prep materials are not only for AutoCAD, but they are for other certification exams. As your time permits, check out this class, Find Your Success with Autodesk Professional Certification. And I really want to thank you for spending your valuable time with us today, and hopefully I have addressed the course objectives and as many exam objectives as possible, and that you will start to develop a study and preparation workflow strategy to pass the exams. And good luck on passing the AutoCAD 2013 certification exams.